What's up guys, today's video I am gonna do a detailed review and pick the top 5 best graphics card, 2021. After doing proper researches, we came to the conclusion that meets the best in terms of overall. Kindly leave a like if you find this helpful, and I'd appreciate if you subscribe to my channel and turn on post notifications if you haven't. We will be also providing affiliates link to purchase from Amazon. Kindly use to for best offers and purchase from anywhere in the world. We'll be back with more videos. The NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3060 Ti is based on the same Ampere architecture as the RTX 3080, and gives us a look at what the Ampere lineup will look like in the mid-range and budget segment of the GPU market. This isn't exactly going to be the graphics card that'll push Watch Dogs Legion with ray tracing at 4K, but it is definitely up to doing it at 1080p. With this graphics card, you're getting 8GB of the same GDDR6 memory found in the RTX 3070, paired with 38A streaming multiprocessors, SM. However, because of changes NVIDIA has made to its SM since Turing, each of these now has 128 CUDA cores, double that of the 64 in each Turing SM. That means there are now 4,864 CUDA cores in the RTX 3060 Ti, up from the 2,176 found in the RTX 2060 Super. Power consumption sees an increase over the RTX 2060 Super, but it's not as pronounced as other cards in the NVIDIA Ampere lineup. The total graphics power, TGP, is 200 watts for the RTX 3060 Ti, up from the 175 watts of the RTX 2060 Super. It's more, but it shouldn't be so much more that you'll need to worry about upgrading your power supply to accommodate, assuming you have a competent one in the first place, that is. Back in Turing, each SM had 2 data paths, one dedicated to floating point, FP32, workloads, and the other dedicated to integer. With Ampere, and thus the RTX 3060 Ti, NVIDIA was able to engineer the SM to have one of the data paths essentially able to pull double duty, which is why the amount of CUDA cores has effectively doubled per SM with Ampere. Outside of CUDA cores, each SM also has tensor cores for AI workloads like deep learning supersampling, DLSS, and dedicated ray tracing cores. Each SM has 1 RT core and 4 tensor cores. The dedicated among you might have noticed that's half the amount of tensor cores in each SM than Turing had, but there's a good reason for that, they're more than twice as fast this time around. The RT core is what's responsible for the ray tracing that everyone is talking about. The whole point is to offload the massive computational load that any kind of ray tracing entails, in order to be able to produce playable frame rates. The AMD Radeon RX 6800 XT is based on Team Red's RDNA 2 graphics architecture, which is still based on a 7nm manufacturing process. Rather than shrinking the die, AMD has worked in some new features and boosted efficiency, which makes these graphics cards way more powerful than their predecessors. The biggest of these is the new Infinity Cache, which is crucial when you consider that the Radeon RX 6800 XT is using 16GB of GDDR6 memory, rather than the GDDR6X memory found on the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3080 and RTX 3090. The Infinity Cache is basically 128MB of global cache, which AMD asserts is 3.25x faster than GDDR6 VRAM on a 256-bit bus. This helps feed data from the larger 16GB VRAM pool to the GPU, and this combination of speedy cache and GDDR6 memory results in 2.4x more bandwidth per watt than the VRAM would be able to achieve on its own. This helps narrow the gap that AMD would otherwise experience when going against the GDDR6X memory in flagship-class NVIDIA cards. The other major addition to the architecture is, of course, the DirectX 12 Ultimate compatible ray accelerators. There are one of these on each of the 72 compute units, which is what lets the AMD Radeon RX 6800 XT able to handle real-time ray tracing at a playable frame rate. We'll dive into just how effective these are later on, but we expect performance to improve as AMD's drivers mature. It's great that the MSI RTX 3080 Gaming X Trio actually lists a higher TGP, than the reference 3080. Well, not great necessarily, but at least it shows MSI took the time to evaluate the product and provide a realistic measure of power requirements. We'll get to that later, but the specs are generally the same as the Asus, the main difference being that the MSI runs with an 1815 MHz boost clock by default, while the Asus card runs with a 1785 MHz boost by default. You have to install Asus GPU Tweak 2 and select the OC mode profile to get the 1815 MHz boost clock. I certainly appreciate not having to bother with one more piece of software, though others may not care so much. Like the Asus card, ultimately the MSI card is a great alternative to the Nvidia Founders Edition. Or at least, it would be if you could find any of the cards in stock. We've heard rumors and hearsay that demand for the Ampere launch was over 4 times greater than what Nvidia saw with the Turing launch. That wouldn't be at all surprising, since Ampere is a bigger jump in performance and also marks round 2 for ray tracing and deep learning gaming hardware, a chance to improve on the first generation RTX cards, basically. Fundamentally, the MSI RTX 3080 Gaming X Trio is pretty similar to what we've seen from previous generation MSI cards. Sure, it's a bit larger than some of the other custom cards out there, but it's mostly the same design as the MSI RTX 2080 Super Gaming X Trio, for the cooler and fans, at least. Just like the rest of the Nvidia GeForce RTX 30 series, the RTX 3080 Ti is built on the Nvidia Ampere architecture, and brings with it the same improvements as the rest of the lineup. There is something new to the table, however. As with the Nvidia GeForce RTX 3060 that launched in March 2021, the Nvidia GeForce RTX 3080 Ti has a hardware-based hash rate limiter that should limit the appeal to cryptocurrency miners. We don't test mining performance at TechRadar, so we can't speak to how effective this limit actually is. But given that the hash rate limiter on the RTX 3060 was accidentally bypassed by Nvidia's own driver update, we'll just have to wait and see how well this actually dissuades miners from buying this graphics card in bulk. Beyond that, the Nvidia GeForce RTX 3080 Ti is actually quite a bit beefier than the original RTX 3080, and that largely falls to core count and memory bandwidth. Because, sure, the Nvidia GeForce RTX 3080 Ti does have more VRAM, with 12GB of GDDR6X compared to 10GB of the stuff on the original card, but it's also on a faster 384-bit memory bus. That means you get 912GB per second of memory bandwidth on the RTX 3080 Ti compared to the RTX 3080's 760GB per second. With faster VRAM, not to mention just more memory, the RTX 3080 Ti should be even more adept at 4K gaming in the future. The RTX 3080 Ti is straight up more powerful, as well. The GPU has 10,240 CUDA cores across 80 compute units, compared to the RTX 3080's 8,704 CUDA cores. That's a 17% increase in core count, but don't expect a strict 17% performance increase. More on that later. You're also going to get access to Nvidia's whole suite of software features, and it's not just limited to gaming. The one we are still in love with is Nvidia Broadcast, which is ostensibly designed for streamers and content creators, but we find that it is incredibly useful in just day-to-day life. The Nvidia GeForce RTX 3070 is powered by the Ampere GA104 GPU. This GPU has 5,888 CUDA cores spread across 46 streaming multiprocessors, based on the same Nvidia Ampere architecture as the RTX 3080 and RTX 3090. And, as with those cards, there are a ton of improvements both to raw performance and to power efficiency here that drive this mid-range graphics card to performance levels matched only by the very best graphics card of the last generation. The biggest generation-on-generation improvement from Turing to Ampere is that both data paths on the streaming multiprocessor, SM, now support FP32 workloads, which sees an effective doubling of CUDA cores per SM. That's why, while the RTX 2070 had 36 SMs, it had just 2,304 CUDA cores. So, while the RTX 3070 only boosts SM count up by 27%, it more than doubles the CUDA core count, which massively boosts raw rasterization performance. That's impressive enough, but we're also getting second-generation RT cores and third-generation Tensor cores, which means both ray tracing and DLSS are much more performant and efficient. Ray tracing especially is much faster, as this new RT core brings twice the throughput as the first-generation RT core found on graphics cards like the Nvidia GeForce RTX 2080. This is why in ray tracing heavy workloads like the new 3D Mark Port Royal benchmark, the RTX 3070 is able to keep up with the RTX 2080 Ti, even though the last generation flagship has much more RT cores. The Nvidia GeForce RTX 3070 is also the only graphics card in the Ampere lineup with a reasonable level of power consumption, with a TGP, total graphics power, rating of 220 watts, 100 watts less than the RTX 3080.